What is up, sons? It is Blind Run once again with Son of a Tech, and today I have another performance mashup between the EVGA GTX1060 super clock, which yes, that is 6GB of VRAM, versus the XFX RX480 GTR with the hard swap fans. And the game is going to be the most anticipated remaster of the year, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Stick around. So, to get things started off, let's talk about the Testbench. It's going to be an i7-3770K, overclocked to 4.4 GHz, mated to an Asus P8Z77 Pro Thunderbolt motherboard with 16 GB of GDDR, almost got you, DDR3 1600 MHz RAM, and of course the aforementioned graphics cards with an 860 watt power supply from Corsair, and the game will be running on a solid state PNY 500 GB drive. The benchmark is going to be right after the FNG mission, the fucking new guy mission. Is that what it stands for? And it is going to be run right as you are going down the rope. So as soon as you start to exit the helicopter and land onto the ship, press your benchmarking hotkey. For me, that is F11, and get going. As you land onto the ship, you will be placed right in front of a window that will have 3 bad guys in it. Shoot them from left to right, and then try to strafe and back up and observe Soap and your other teammates open the door, and then follow them, letting them go ahead of you until you go to the right and down the stairs. When you turn to the left and enter the hallway, you will see a drunken bad guy. Shoot him in the fucking head if you have a chance, and then reload. Wait until Soap goes ahead and takes a knee, walk past him. Do not do any sprinting for this benchmark, and then take a left and walk down the stairs while keeping your eyes about level, and try to walk to the manhole and then turn left. Watch 3 friendlies come rappelling down from a helicopter, and then move yourself underneath the walkway, past 2 posts, and turn right and follow once again. The benchmark will end shortly thereafter and should be 60 seconds long. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about settings. We are going to be doing 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. The first big note is I can go ahead and tell you that this game is probably going to go to Nvidia's corner, as I was jumping through settings, I noticed that the ambient occlusion setting of HBAO Plus was available. Of course, fuck. That means that is an Nvidia proprietary setting, and while you can turn it on for AMD, I wouldn't recommend it. Almost 99.9% of the time you'll get some sort of artifacting. If you're currently playing a game like Tomb Raider even, and you're seeing some weird artifacting, go check your ambient occlusion settings and make sure that that's not turned on if you're on an AMD system. So we went ahead and turned that down, and just 1 notch below the HBAO Plus, and then we went ahead and went through the rest of the settings to the highest available, and there's a special one here, and that is going to be use existing or leftover memory. So you can fill up the rest of the VRAM on your card and with textures, preloaded textures, to help improve frame rate. So let's start talking about that. So at 1080p with the no memory filling setting off, you're going to have a minimum of 88 FPS on the RX480 with an average of 127.1 and a max of 186. On the GTX 1060, you're going to have a minimum frame rate of 95 with an average of 126.3 and a max of 184. Something to note here is that the minimum frame rate is quite a bit better on the GTX 1060, and while it loses out on max frame rate, the numbers are more consistent along with the rest of the frame timing. Now, here's the interesting thing. If we go ahead and allow Call of Duty 4 to use this feature of filling up the VRAM, you're going to notice that you're going to get significant performance increase at 1080p. And so here's the thing that you need to take a look at. If you turn it on, you will notice that you will have in the bottom right corner your max available memory and the memory that's being used. If you turn this setting on, it will max it all the way out. But to see how much you're actually getting, turn it off first and see what that setting's at. In our case, it's at 1080p, it's at 5 gigabytes. So on the GTX 1060, we have a gigabyte of preloaded textures, and on the RX480, we are going to have 3 gigabytes of preloaded textures. So you would think that the RX480 would get a larger advantage, right? Well, let's take a look. On the RX480, the minimum frame rate now is bumped up from 88 to 95, matching the earlier minimum frame rate for the GTX 1060 with this setting off. The average went from 127.1 to 129.2 FPS, and the max went to a whopping 205 FPS. This is kind of interesting. It's almost as if the textures are getting thrown at the processor or the GPU core too fast and causing maybe some slowdown or smaller frame rates. Because if we bump over to the GTX 1060, which has a smaller memory bus, keep in mind, and we turn this setting on, we get a huge performance increase from 95 FPS on the minimum to 117 FPS, with an average bumping from 126.3 to 142.5 with a max of 193. Of course, that max you'll see is significantly lower, well, not significantly, 10 frames lower, so about 10% lower than the RX 480. However, our minimums and our averages are just blowing the RX 480 out of the water. Whatever reason this is, and obviously, as we mentioned, this does seem to be Nvidia optimized, at least previously. It's interesting to see this be optimized because Infinite Warfare itself, which came along with this game, or this game came along with it, I think it should have been vice versa personally. In that case, we saw both the RX 480 and the GTX 1060 perform almost exactly the same, and be sure to check that video out as well. So what happens at higher resolutions? Well, if we jump up to 1440p, the RX 480 receives a minimum of 74 FPS with an average of 93.6 and a max of 130. On the GTX 1060, the minimum stays at 97 FPS, and keep in mind that we left memory fill on here, with an average of 119.9 FPS and a max of 173. Those are really impressive numbers for the GTX 1060. And then we bump up to the Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare Remaster Big Daddy, the 4K. We want to play that remaster in 4K, don't we? I know I do. So let's check this out. The GTR RX 480 had a minimum frame rate of 38 FPS with an average of 49.8 and a max of 64 FPS. While this is playable, it's not preferable, and I would knock the settings down at least a tad and get some VSync going on. Or if you're lucky enough, like moi, and you have a FreeSync panel or available option in 4K, it should perform fine. Moving on to the GTX 1060 6GB, we have a minimum at 4K of 51 FPS with an average of 64.7 and a max of 85 FPS. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard those magic words of an average FPS above 60 FPS. Wow, that was a mouthful. And that's a ton of a mouthful mouthful of frames too. This means that at a pretty budget price, you can get yourself into some 4K Modern Warfare Remaster, which is pretty cool, I think. And in conclusion, it's obvious here that the Modern Warfare Remaster is of course optimized for Nvidia, unlike its bigger brother or newer brother or younger brother, Infinite Warfare. If you guys are interested in the Infinite Warfare performance benchmarks with these same GPUs, please find the link in the description below or somewhere around here. If you want to see individual performance reviews with more detail of either the XFX GTR RX480 or the EVGA GTX1060 Superclock, I will also leave them down here as well for you. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you already are subscribed, please hit the little notification button because that helps me out and it helps you find my videos in your sub box. And until next time, I will see you next Tuesday.